evening. I'm Tim Mudise, and thank you for joining me on Q&A. There is little question that a national training program to improve the skills level of South African workers is necessary. But as yet, there is no answer about who should pay for such a program. Tonight on Q&A, we look at the proposal that companies pay a 1.5% payroll levy to fund a national training program. With me at the table here, I'm with the Minister of Labour, Mr. Tito Mboweni.
Good evening, Tim.
Mr. Mike Settler from COSATU, and the Director General of the South African Chamber of Business, Mr. Raymond Parsons.
Hi,
good
Tim.
evening and welcome. Mr. Mboweni, you started the whole debate by publishing your green paper, and you are suggesting that business should pay for a policy formulated by yourself. But if government is that keen on improving the skills of the South African workforce, why is government not paying for such training?
Well, government will also pay. The proposal is for a levy grant system, which would partly come from the private sector on the basis of payroll, but also from the government in the form of fiscal contributions.
This payroll levy, is it going to be like some sort of tax on the salaries and wages that businesses pay?
Tim, I think that for people at home, they may be a bit confused about what we're talking about. Suddenly tax, payroll, this and that. The key issue is that we have launched a national skills strategy. It's aimed at blowing the whistle for the start of a national skills revolution. A kind of skills revolution which will impart skills to a larger percentage of our people who are historically unskilled or who actually need skills now to enter the labor market, to be able to be more productive, to assist companies in competitiveness.
One would have thought, Raymond, that in the age of global competition, that South African companies would wake up to the fact that they need to train their employees themselves. But then it seems you guys are not doing enough, to an extent that the Minister of Labour is now stepping in and saying, look, we say you must contribute 1% or 1.5%. That should go towards the training of employees.
I think, Tim, the business has woken up to it, but we've got to see the wider context. We've got to see the Green Paper in the context of the government's macroeconomic strategy. And I call it the tale of three deficits. There's the deficit on the budget, the deficit on the balance of payments, and the skills deficit. And those are the three deficits we've got to address over the next 3 or 4 years. And what the Green Paper is doing is to address the skills deficit. How do we best close that gap? And as far as business is concerned, we share that vision that we have to close that gap. Otherwise, we're not going to get the 6% growth. We're not going to get the employment targets of the macroeconomic strategy. But the two issues of concern in the Green Paper to business now, and that's where the serious debate has to really begin, is the governance and the financing of training. I mean, that's where the debate is going to be. And we in business are saying, let's engage ourselves in that debate, but bearing in mind that we are very globally competitive now. We have to become globally competitive, and we must also understand that there are other steps waiting in the wings, all of which add to the costs of doing business in this country. So when we proceed through this debate about how to finance training, we must apply these tests. So we're at a very early stage in this debate, but we in business engage very seriously in this debate because it is a very high priority.
The guys at the union, COSATU, are saying, well, it's a great idea, we need to have this levy imposed on businesses, but then it doesn't go far enough. Mike, you guys reckon that it should be actually something between 4 to 6%?
Yes.
Are you going to come in as a trade federation yourselves to pay maybe the difference, 3%, and say business should chip in with 3%?
No, we're not going to be paying something as a federation. The point where we come from is that there are beneficiaries in the system that which benefit out of when workers has acquired skills that which make them productive and it's business, because that will contribute into the profit that which business make. Therefore, we argue very strong that business has to pay.
Right.
And the government also has to take them halfway in terms of that.
But I think when we talk about training, there are two sides of the coin. The one is training, the other side is, of course, productivity. And when you really talk about productivity, you have to understand there have to be three beneficiaries. There has to be the worker, the consumer, and the business person. So when we talk about training, it must be affordable, it must be well-directed, and it must be focused in terms of the realities of South Africa. And that's the debate that we're coming into now.
Precisely. That's the reason why we're having this skill strategy.
Well,
to be focused, to be able to produce the skills that are required, and of course in the process
but let me come to you, Andrew. Let's go back to the worker. What does the worker stand to benefit? And you may raise your question or express your opinion as well.
And let me say at the outset, I think the whole discussion is not about ends, it's about means. We all agree on the end. But I think we've got to be careful about being sidetracked with broad kind of brushstrokes of productivity and beneficiaries and this, that, and the other. And we've got to look at a couple of things. The first thing is that the cost of delivery of a national training system via a levy is going to be quite considerable. Are we creating a bureaucracy? Secondly, is this the most effective means of allocating that resource? And in point of fact, if one almost has to punish employers by saying, you must pay, rather than having them want to pay because they perceive a benefit, point one. Point two, it's all very well to talk about productivity, but productivity doesn't follow with training. It's a prerequisite, but unless people are prepared to work more flexibly and approach the issue, we've got to encompass the debate to look at all of the other factors. And I know that my colleagues from COSATU and elsewhere will say, absolutely, now we're talking about multi-skilling, and that's got to be the next step.
Well, we're not going to say absolutely. The comment that has been made, I call them paradigm paralysis. The people who are not prepared to change, even if there's a push for us to change. I do not understand.
Surely that must be a valid point, that you are going to set up a new bureaucracy. How can you trust that government is going to make this new bureaucracy
We don't start from setting a bureaucracy. We start from saying there's a problem in terms of skills shortage in our country. And what do we do in order to resolve that problem? One way mechanism to address that problem is to make sure that funding is available in order for us to address that problem.
How do we ensure that the funding is applied efficiently and effectively and used?
If I may say so.
Alvin, come in.
Well, I was just wondering how much it is we're talking about. The Green Paper doesn't specify for the private sector what the levy will be. It implies 1 to 1.5% for the public sector, but leaves vague the amounts that will be paid in the private sector.
It is clear.
Is it?
1 to 1.5% of payroll. For the private sector.
For the public sector.
For the private sector.
For the private sector as well.
And we're saying that the government also has to make a contribution to this. I think when we come back, we need to discuss this question. Are we creating a bureaucracy or not?
Yeah. Mr. Minister, another question. Aren't those who perhaps can pay the most, the high-tech industries, the profitable industries, the one who have the least people on their payroll? Are we not perhaps not punishing, but taxing those who can pay least when we should perhaps be getting more from those that have the money?
I'm worried, Tim, that people are not quite clear what is it that is going to be paid for. So that's why this rather irrational discussion.
But why? Is it to do with the Green Paper itself?
No, it does not do with the question imposed.
I think the point...
It's up at the wrong place.
I think the point that was made by Andrew, and he actually agrees with me, is that there are some red lights in the Green Paper, if I put it that way.
All right, because I know that men can be aggressive. We can't just butt in as and when we feel like. This time I should give you a chance, Lyle. Let me hear from you.
Well, great. I'm Lael Bethlehem from NEDLAC, and NEDLAC is the body that brings government, business and labour together with the community in order to negotiate over things like payroll levies and policy. And we've been doing research over a period of 2 years on the international experience of funding training and of training systems. And I think 2 important points should be made. First of all, many companies are already spending an average of about 3%, is what we found in our survey, on training already. It's a question really of what sort of training that money is spent on. Is it part of training that is part of an accredited system where workers can walk away with a certificate that is recognized across industry? And secondly, that in the international experience, the way to avoid a bureaucracy is to give the money back to the stakeholders themselves. And in the Green Paper, the idea is to have sectoral education and training organizations which take the money back and then use it in a way that is best for them. The bureaucracy is not out there in Pretoria. It is the people who give the money who ultimately control it.
Claire.
Okay. Yes. I think at first glance, Mr. Minister, I've got to say it seems to me that you're going to push up the cost of doing business, you're going to increase the cost of labour, and business is going to pass this tax straight on to the consumer in the form of higher costs, lower increases. And I also worry about the bureaucracy. I think you're going to need a huge bureaucracy to drive this, which is going to soak up most of the money.
Well, first, let me say that there's no free lunch. As business people who operate small business will tell you, at McDonald's and other places, you must pay for your lunch. You can't have your cake and eat it. You can't say, I want skills, but I don't want to pay for it. You have to pay for it. And it's in the nature of economic activities that you have to pay in order to attain, indeed, your efficiencies in your business.
But I think
secondly,
most businesses do
No,
trade.
secondly, let me address the issue
Yes.
of bureaucracy.
Yes.
We are proposing that the funds will be collected nationally.
Yes.
Yeah, into a national skills fund. And 80% of those funds will be dispersed back in the form of grants to the sectors which are involved in training. But once again, government has to govern. Government can't not govern. Therefore, we're saying the sector education and training organizations, or the CETOs, must produce training plans on the basis of which they'll be able to get the money from the Department of Labor and the National Skills Authority. So at the level of the National Skills Authority, we're talking about a very small entity, completely very small. So it's not going to be some kind of huge ghost plan.
Well, Claire, let me hear from you. Claire Houghton.
Yeah, I think the perception is that all firms are offering training, or the majority of firms are actually offering training.
Team building in Mauritius.
And I think that's a bit of a false perception, because the ILO report states that of small companies, those, in other words, those employing less than 50 people, only 15.5% of those firms are actually offering any basic kind of formal training. Obviously, the larger the company, the greater the percentage, and it goes up to about 39% for those companies employing more than 400 people.
Who actually gets to be trained? Is it the top executives or
That's
just
another
ordinary
problem.
workers? Do they get their skills
also-
upgraded?
Yeah, their report also showed that of those receiving training, only 10% of those were production workers. So it's really targeted at white-collar workers. The real benefits are not...
That's the question.
Aha, so we will continue with this debate in a short while. This is Q&A with Tim Modise. My guests are here. Minister of Labour, Tito Mboweni, is the key guest. And, of course, getting a little bit of a roasting from the audience there. We will be back in a short
support.
This is Q&A, and we are talking about the proposal that companies pay a 1.5% payroll levy to fund a national training program. And I think the next question should go to Andrew Levy, since we're talking levies tonight.
Yes, I'm here and I represent the levy.
What about the competitive edge that individual companies might want to protect and secure? Where if workers are going to be or will have to undergo sectoral training, instead of training within their companies, that certain companies might lose that competitive edge.
Tim, I don't see that as a problem, and I think all companies would agree that a trained labour force is one that gives you a competitive edge. I think the problem that I'm scared about, and as I said, this is a discussion about means and not ends, is that we interpose a bureaucracy, whatever it may cost. It seems like it may cost 20%, but we interpose a bureaucracy. And so whatever decisions are made second or third hand.
Hang on.
Employers training
Where do
because
you
they
have that
perceive the need.
80% is going to go back to the industries
Where's the other
themselves.
20% going?
Let me explain.
Please.
I said that the funds are collected nationally. 80% of the funds collected are dispersed back to the training organizations on the basis of the production of training plans. No? Point number one. The other 20% is going to be used to influence national priorities. It's not going to be paying.
Such as what? National priority?
For example, let me give an example. We may feel that we need to influence the manner in which technicons and technical colleges provide their training. Use that 20% as part of the support funding for specific types of training programs in those technical colleges.
I want to reduce this discussion to the level of the worker who might be watching this program. We've been talking figures, percentages, and so on, and it's like money changing hands, but the people who are going to be caught up in the middle do not know what we're talking about. Nowhere to.
What about your own employees? Mr. Tito Mboweni, because I'm sure workers at the private sector now are very excited, but you are not saying anything about the public or civil servants.
No. Once again, the Green Paper says, let's divide the country into about 20 clusters. Yeah? And one of those clusters will deal with the public service and administration. So they'll be part of the training.
And government
will also be putting money into the training fund. Quite clearly, they also will have to benefit.
Will government be paying its share as an employer? Because I'm sure the largest employer in the country.
Government is an employer.
So we'll be paying that 1.5% levy.
Is an employer.
Yes. Tim, I'm Don Moody from COFISA. Training levies are not new. They've been with us since 1980. But let us look at the de facto situation. The number of apprentices from 1991 to 1995 reduced from 10,000 to 500. The number of people trained were reduced from 500,000 to 250,000. It's all in the annual report of the Department of Labour. These are facts. The fact is...
Why did that happen?
Because of the levy.
No, it's got nothing to do with the levy.
Is that not one of the reasons?
Come off it.
Is that not one? Why are we reducing?
Come off it. It's got nothing to do with the levy.
What is
it has
the cost?
to do with a system that does not work.
But what does the public have to
and that's
pay?
that's why we're changing.
Yes, Mpumi, I will come to your defense, as I said earlier on, you know, that, yes.
In fact, the problem is that the 1% will not, or 1.5% is not enough. Because if you look at the extent of the problem that we have, we need more money. Because if you look at where we are as a country, we're number 45 in terms of productivity. And I'm actually quite surprised that business would squeal for one or one and a half.
But can I make a point?
Yes,
here, please? My name's Brian Angus and I'm from CIFSA. And I think the whole problem with the proposal regarding funding in the Green Paper is that fundamentally it's a kind of one-size-fits-all proposal.
Yes.
And that's, for me, the real problem about the thing. And I think the last...
But what should happen?
I think the last speaker's comment is... Sorry, can I just finish?
Yes, Brian.
I think the last speaker's comment is entirely right. In some sectors and in some businesses, you may well need to spend well in excess of 1 or 1.5% of your payroll on training. In others, it may be less. And as I say, I think the real problem is that 1 to 1.5% is not the answer. I think what needs to happen is that each sector of industry and business in South Africa has to decide what its training priorities are, who needs to be trained, and what the costs of that training are going to be, and what those businesses in that particular sector can afford.
And Brian, can then government trust, therefore, that the same sectors we're talking about will say, we're willing to pay 4% levies? Because everybody seems to be talking about reducing that 1% levy.
No, but Tim, what the bottom line is that everything that's being said so far is in fact in the macroeconomic strategy. A more flexible labour market. That's the test that business is going to apply. A flexible training system that accommodates the diversity of the labour market. You cannot have one size for all. Now that's what the debate is going to be about. And I think that's a very constructive debate.
But what does a flexible training system mean?
It certainly doesn't mean one size for all.
What does it mean?
It means that you have to accommodate the diversity of the labour market. You cannot necessarily in every sector say that what works, for example, if you take the engineering industry, workers in the engineering industry are not in the same position as those in the retail sector.
Have you read the Green Paper?
Yes, I've read it.
What does it say about the clusters?
It says we must recognize diversity.
So what's the problem?
But
I want to bring in another class of workers that we haven't spoken about here tonight. And the unemployed people, the 30% of the labor force that is unemployed. How is it going to be affected by these new ideas?
It's one of the issues is about structured learning and structured training. So what then happens is that those who are outside of the of work at the moment will also benefit from the various types of training. I did say that we're proposing the division of the economy into about 20 clusters. So unemployed people will also be trained within those clusters. These training organizations will have training facilities which should be made available to unemployed people as well. But also I said the 20% we will use to influence training patterns and trends within training institutions which unemployed people can also go.
Alvin, we're talking about percentages here, but what impact will this have on the productivity levels in general?
Tim, may I make an interjection here? perhaps just to respond from the labor perspective into your point that you've raised about unemployed. We believe that there are certain targeted groups in our community. That's unemployed, women, rural people, people with disabilities. And when those people do not have skills, employers use them, exploit them with less skills to make profits. We believe that people talk about bureaucracy, but our belief is that the 20% should be able also to assist those categories of people.
I'm coming back to you, Elvin. I just want to go back to the minister here, that if I'm unemployed at the moment, and this system gets established, gets into operation, how is it going to affect me directly? How will I access that kind of training?
No. The key issue is that the system will enable you to get into a training system so that you can acquire skills which can be demanded by industry. It's a particular sector. Say, for example, you go into a training program in the hospitality and tourism sector. Yeah?
Right.
Because the industry has indicated that it needs skills to go into that particular sector.
So in a sense, to make it practical, and for me to understand it in that practical sense, we are moving from a situation where we used to approach employers and say, and when you get asked, what kind of work are you looking for, you say, now we are going to be able to specify and say, I can do this, I can do that, I can do this.
The other thing that is very important in this green paper proposals is that we want to create high-powered, effective employment services, which will serve as a place where employers and prospective employees.
We're number 46, Alvin, in the world. Well, out of 46 anyway. We have around 200 countries in the world, so before people start to think that we are worse off, we're at least 46 out of 46. This new idea, to what extent do you think it is going to improve the productivity levels in the country?
If the 1.5% payroll levy promotes a sufficient incentive for a substantial increase in the volume and quality of training, it will have a substantial effect in improving the levels of productivity, if it is large enough, if the incentives are large enough. In terms of a 1.5% levy as an additional cost to the business, a 1.5% increase in the payroll cost is a relatively tiny increase in the total cost for most businesses.
Claire Gephardt, you raised an issue about consumers being affected by all these levies that are being introduced. To what extent do you think that this is going to affect the way we spend our cash?
Well, I think a business is going to pass this cost on to the consumer. It's going to be higher prices. But what I really want to ask the minister...
That's what you're going to do. It really want to be passed on in higher price. If it's not designed properly, and let me say that, if it's not a serious thing doing something that business believes can work, it'll either be passed on higher prices or it'll be higher unemployment.
Yes, I want to say, what I bet that employers watching this program tonight are saying to themselves, how can we reduce our payroll? And business will always find a loophole. In fact, payrolls will disappear and they'll hire consultants, or else workers will be retrenched. And what happens to cash...
Hire consultants to do what? To produce a motor car?
What happens to cash-strapped companies? Say you've got a small business. If it's imposed on your payroll, what if they're in a loss situation? What happens then?
But then, let me pose the question to you. Who should improve the skills level in the country?
I think economic growth is going to do a lot of this. And a lot of people would say government should be enabling.
It's the other way around.
If I can just throw in some information. I think, first of all, it's true to say that in our survey, although people were spending 3.3% of their payroll on training, it was only 0.59% of their turnover. So I think we must get the proportions right. We also have to recognize South Africa is in a very poor position with regard to human resources. We need to spend money on human resources. The question, as Andrew Levy says, is how. And then just for some information, Tim, NEDLAC has produced some booklets, one looking at the international experience of the financing of training, one looking at the current situation in South Africa. Those are available at NEDLAC, and we believe that these sorts of debates are very critical because at the end of the day, we are all affected by the financing of training. And those booklets will hopefully help us to debate these things and come to quick and effective
solutions. The quality of life of individual workers, is it going to be improved by this new scheme?
It depends on the execution, because part of the problem is that you can have a good system where government says people must do this and monitor the quantitative measures, but the problem is the execution. And
if it has the support of labour and business, it will work and it will be a success.
And it has the support of Labour and business.
Well, Ray, thanks very much. And this is how we come to the end of the program. When he released the Green Paper, the Minister predicted a hot debate around the very idea of a levy. We hope tonight gave him and you an idea of things to come. We appreciate your comments and suggestions, and please continue to send them to us via fax number 714-2117, 714-2117 on the Johannesburg code, or you can email to qanda@sabc.co.za, qanda@sabc.co.za. Thank you, and good night to you, and to my guests.
Good night.
Thank you.